Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to be getting on the Ford COE rat rod, and we're going to be getting into the electronics, the steering, and possibly some details for the body. Alright, so let's get started. The first thing I'm starting off with here is a little plate, kind of like a skid plate to go up underneath the majority of the center of the chassis. And what I'm going to do is use that to house some electronics, and as well as just kind of cover up the bottom of the chassis and get everything cleaned up a little bit. I don't remember what kind of plastic this is, but it's a very hard, rigid plastic, and so I'm just basically using the tape so I can have a good place to mark on that and getting at the outline of the bottom. And what I'll end up doing is putting some holes in there and using some flat screws. So I'm trying to figure out if there's the good place to put the servo. I thought I was gonna have tons of room up front, and it really had to cram this thing in there. But basically, what I ended up doing is just getting a little piece of aluminum bracket and making a little mount that goes straight through the the front. It took a bit of going back and forth, different spacers, adjusting things, but I was finally able to get the front suspension, the steering, and everything working. I still want to come back and widen these wheels out by just a little bit. It'll help fill out in the body better, and it'll also help clearance around where the rods come in and get close to the inside of the tires. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with this. That the servo is mounted directly to the axle. And you get full travel. I mean, for the system it works fairly well. I mean, you don't get a whole lot of side to side, but I don't think this system really is designed to do that much. Again, I don't need a lot of travel. It's just meant to be low and right on the street, so I think it'll be fine. The underside was basically, I don't know, it's a pretty thick piece of plastic, and I just cut it to shape. Clearance it around the back here. I wish it could have come over this spur, but really it's going to have to drag down unless I make another cover for it, but I'm pretty sure it'll be fine. So put some screws around here to hold this into the chassis, and two things. It'll give me a skid plate in the bottom, but more importantly, it'll give me a spot to mount the electronics. So I'll put my speed controller right here, and I'll put my receiver up underneath the engine, and I think that's probably all I'm really going to need for this. Not going to be much else. And the good thing is it's the speed controller really close to the motor, really close to the receiver. The servo wire is plenty long enough to get to the receiver, and the battery is not that far away either. So I think it's a pretty good spot for this. So that's what I'll get to next, is getting the electronics set up, and so I can get some of the wiring, and maybe get into doing something with the rear end, and we'll just see where that goes. Alright, let's get to that. Now just trying to give a little bit of room. I'm removing the transmission and placing the electronics in, and basically I just put down some Velcro and stuck the receiver up underneath the engine and the speed controller right next to the motor. Be a pretty good spot for both of them. So I like to put these quick connects and just solder these on, these little barrel connectors, and they work really well. It's the same basic principle as the XT60 plug, but you put these on for the motors, and I use the same ones, the same configuration, and so if I need to, I can swap a speed controller around pretty quick. I never seem to have any other colors other than red or black for these larger 12 or 13 gauge wires that I'm using for the motor. So what I end up doing is just take red for red, black for black, and then for the white I'll just take a piece of heat shrink and put it on there just so I can help identify that later. So the original Welderup truck had this big giant bumper that was made out of like an industrial wrench, and I looked and looked and looked and finally found these are 1/6 scale wrenches, and so they're supposed to be like normal size for 1/6, but when you scale them to what this truck is like 1/8.5, it's about a 2-inch wrench. So I think they work really well. So here I'm just building these together. Because the wrenches weren't quite long enough and I needed some to kind of poke out to be the holder for the bumper. So I took 2 wrenches, cut them up, and was able to come together with make one. So I looked out here, and this is a H-beam or an I-beam, I forget which one it is. But it's just a piece of styrene that happened to be exactly the same dimension as the wrench webbing was. It was not quite as thick, but all I had to do was come in and cut 2 little thin strips. I think of like 10 or 15 thousandths, and put them on either side, and then put 1 strip across the whole thing, and a little bit of filler, and you really couldn't even tell that they were ever 2 pieces. I'm not exactly sure what the material this was. I think it was some kind of a cast resin that the original wrench was made out of. Any solvents wouldn't touch it, so I'm assuming it's some kind of a resin. When you cut it, it had that look to it. But the super glue and the CA glue really held good on it. So whatever it was, I looked out that it worked really well with what I had for gluing the thing together. As you can see, I'm taking the other end of the wrench and gluing it on as a holder, and then I'll just cut some holes into the bumper and extend that in. So I wanted to make it easy to remove, so what I ended up doing is gluing some styrene strips on the inside, drilling and tapping a hole into it, and was able to come back and put a screw to hold the bumper in, so the bumper is removable. So I have the bumper complete here, and so what I end up having is these 2 wrenches that I've cut and kind of pieced together, to emulate the same style bumper that is on the Welderup truck. I thought these were a little bit big, but when I actually did the scale calculations to see what size these are, I think this is like a 2-inch and like 2.5, which is huge wrenches. But like these are wrenches that are definitely used out there in the world, and I've actually used them before in when I was younger. So pretty cool to have these bumpers on there like that. I still have a lot more little details like that to put on, but I've also was able to get the electronics at least placed and wired up inside the chassis here. This speed controller, receiver, the servo in the front. So I think everything is in pretty good shape, and you know, I'm not gonna worry about testing it out because I decided to just pull the drive shaft out until I get the correct one in the mail. Okay, so I'm just gonna keep adding some details and working on things, and see if we can get this thing a little bit further on. All right, let's get back to it. The one thing I didn't think I was ever going to be able to find, and finally after a lot of searching I came up with these little mason jars. So the original truck had these mason jars in the back. It had some kind of a green fluid with like a little fake bug. So I think the concept was a fermented fruit was the name of the truck, and so I guess it was supposed to be some bugs that got in and drank some fermented fruit. So I use more of that I-beam or H-beam to make the scale, make the license plate. And I actually have a scale license plate on order for this. It's going to be replica older PA license plate, and it's my Wesmade logo on it. So that'll be coming in a couple weeks, and so it should just pop right onto that little license plate holder I made there. So the original Ford COE doesn't have these lights up on the fenders, but they had them on the GMC, the one that the Welderup used. And I'm not sure if they were original on them or not. I just like the look of them, so I decided to make them and put them on. So it's just a piece of brass, and I took some styrene and wedged it in there, add a little bit of super glue, and I'm able to drill a hole through the brass up into the styrene, which allows me to use a screw to hold it in. And it's just axial lights, sanded down a little bit, and gingerly tapped in with a hammer. And they're not going to be functional, but I think they should look pretty good. So I mentioned that the original one had this fluid in it, so I wanted to have something similar, but I wanted to make it red. So I took a little bit of red paint and the red taillight paint, the clear, and just mixed that with the 2-part epoxy, and took a little toothpick and just kind of put just a little bit in, set it at an angle so that when it dried it would look like it was at the angle of when it was installed. I'm getting to some of the parts where the details are kind of coming out on this build. Right now it's not there, but a lot of the things are seeing really good progress and getting excited. Starting in the front, I have these little lights, and so these are just a little piece of brass tube, I think some axial lights, painted red on the back and amber in the front, and then just bolted up from the bottom. and also some more lights on the side. These just kind of poke through. I think the real one's supposed to be really small mason jars. I just couldn't find anything like that, so these little domed pieces look pretty good, and they're actually going to have LEDs in behind them. In the rear, I have the bumper. Now this is a wrench bumper, and I got it all kind of weathered up here with some real rust, and then just came back with a clear coat, put clear coat on it to protect it. The mason jars in the rear, I have the resin pouring inside of it, and so when you stick it up onto the little caps which are glued onto the back, it looks like the resin is there was a liquid and it's coming down to the bottom, and there'll be a little LED that shines up through that. It started off with gray primer, rust primer, like a terracotta color, some real rust applied. Then it was like black primer. There's some red, different shades of red in different spots. A lot of it's splotchy when I painted it on. There's a dark blue and then this light blue. So the idea is I'll come back and sand down and expose different layers. The center part was the idea this was like just rusted metal laying around their shop, and they built this frame, attached it to the piece they already had with all the existing weathering, and so this is just going to be like a black kind of a rusty looking metal, and eventually I'll stain the wood. So anyway, we're making a lot of progress, still a lot more to go. I did secure another driver. I think this is Fortnite. It's definitely a little bit taller, which is going to look better in here, and so when I get a chance I'll see if I can squeeze him in, hopefully keeping his feet, but possibly not. Alright, so let's continue on. So the weathering is definitely something new for me, way outside of what I'm typically would like to do. Most of the builds I'm doing, I want to make them look like they're brand new, but I'm trying to get into this, and there's a lot to it. It's an art, but it's kind of fun. So multiple layers of paint, and I didn't paint the multiple layers complete, so some areas were lighter than others, some areas with more paint. I tried to think through how the paint would be faded, so some of the darker colors underneath and the lighter colors on top, like say for the blue and the red. And so when you start to sand down through, it looks like the paint that stays on there is lighter and it's more faded, and then as you dig down into there you can see some of the darker colors. That was my thought. I think it turned out pretty good, but it's just lots of layers and lots of wet sanding. So I just took some ebony stain I had. I wanted it a little bit grayer than this. I really didn't have anything. It turned out a little bit darker than what I wanted, but I am happy with the way it turned out. But it's just ebony stain. Put it on the wood, wipe it down, and you're done. So I think the weathering on this grill turned out amazing. So right now I'm just putting in some Molotov chrome on the bezel, and before I seal that up and do the final weathering on that. So to have a backer for the LED, I ended up finding these little micro aluminum funnels, and so I was ended up basically just to cut the very tip of the funnel off, drill it out to a 5mm hole, and then it slips right up inside and is the perfect shape for the lens that I was using. So the original truck had this, this really industrial chain on it, and I couldn't find anything exact. I found a couple things, but it was so expensive. As much as I needed, it would have been, probably over $100. So I got this really cheap necklace, and I think it looks pretty good. Making really good progress on the rear end of this little COE. I have all of the patina sanded down, and a clear coat on it. I have the little tail lights, mason jars, the large wrench, this chain I added down the side. and just a lot of little details here and there. I even went and put a little bit of real rust on the turbo and the exhaust manifold. I still have to detail out this engine, as well as make a bell housing, I guess it would be, to go right here. It's going to be just a top cover, but just something to kind of cover it up and make it look like the engine is connected to a transmission. The you know, like I said, the back is starting to get there. There's still so much more to go to add on here, but it's really looking good. Probably it might get to some of the front, might get to adding some of the details. We're going to see what we end up with, but let's just get to that. So the intercooler piping and the exhaust coming off the turbo were both visible, and I wanted to replicate that. So just drilling out holes for this aluminum dowel I have that fits right up inside this tubing, and I'm going to run that tubing with a smaller aluminum, I guess it's tubing inside. It's aluminum tubing inside the rubber tubing, and so I can bend that aluminum tubing to give it the shape, and then slip the rubber tubing over so it doesn't put it, you know, it wants to stay at the angles I'm putting it at anyway. So I needed a good solid mount to be able to get the tubing on. So I used some brass tubing I had, and then put another piece on the inside and super glued that all together. And then what it allows me to do is be able to push that tubing over the end and give it a nice, good, solid connection. So here's one of the scary parts, is that once you have your part completely done and painted and ready to go, you get the Dremel out and you cut big giant holes in it. But I knew this was going to be the plan all along. So the expanded metal I use is just a cheap desktop file folder caddy, and you can get like different, you know, garbage cans and pencil holders and different things. So if anybody follows the channel, they'll know that there's a good reason I have a lot of this bandage tape around. But what I'm using it here for is to replicate the exhaust wrap. Again, trying to replicate the original, and the original had the two exhaust tips coming off the side, and they were these big giant rusty pieces of metal. So essentially what I'm doing is just cutting an opening and using the very tip of an oil funnel and cutting that off, you know, sanding it down, gluing it in, and then weathering that. Okay, so I think I'm at a pretty good stopping point here for this video. I have got a lot accomplished, and it's really starting to look good. It's starting to look like I envisioned in my mind. Starting at the back, so we have the bumper here, which is I think it's resin cast or some kind of a plastic. Ended up having to buy two sets, cutting them, piecing them together. re-weathered them in the rust, and they turned out pretty good for the bumper. The little mason jar taillights, which I filled with a colored epoxy, like a 2-part epoxy, and to give it that look that there's like some kind of liquid in there. I have this little chain that runs down the down the fenders and down the side piece here. The real Welderup one has some kind of like heavy industrial chain. This is the closest I could find. It's a necklace, obviously, but I think it looks pretty good. I think it really does add to it. Obviously the fenders, the weathering, lots of layers of paint. There's a couple things I did off camera. I extended the tires out to get a little bit closer to the edge. I think I got a little bit too far out. I have some different offset wheel hexes coming. I might hopefully bump those in like a millimeter or two. But anyway, so that's getting pretty good in the back. This center section is pretty well complete. I have the intercooler piping, the exhaust. Added a little piece here. It's a little air filter. Got the I guess muffler tips here, just a rusted piece of metal. Actually, like a large oil funnel. The grill for the intercooler, and this intercooler piping, which is just hose. I still have to wrap with the friction tape. Still have a lot more detailing in here. A little bit of rust on here, but there's going to be a lot more weathering. I still got to make a transmission cover here, just kind of bridge that little opening there, and kind of add in some details. But I think the back is getting pretty close. I'm hoping to get onto the cab next and kind of finish this thing up. A lot of fun projects, really cool videos coming out. Really looking forward to that. But until then, we'll see you in the rocks.